All right, next up, after we got all of our extra capacitors right here, next up is we're going to do the resistor arrays. So we actually have 3 different resistor arrays that are all doing kind of different things. So the first are these 33 ohm resistors, and there's 4 of them. These are the shortest ones. And what these are doing is basically a current limiting on the inputs from the buzzers. It's kind of just a good principle in your electrical design to, if you're ever getting, some kind of data in from a source that is not part of your PCB, you typically want to put a very low resistance value like these 33 ohm resistors on it, just to make sure you don't get a current spike that's going to fry your system. So that's what these 33 ohm resistors are about. The next are these 2 150 ohm resistors. And these 150 ohm resistors, slightly higher, are actually pull-down resistors for the LEDs. So the integrated circuits that are powering the LEDs provide 5 volts, which is and about up to about 20 milliamps of power. Now those 20 milliamps are exactly right for the LEDs that we selected, but the voltage drop that the LED is expecting is only about 2 volts. And so these 150 ohm pull-down resistors just take up the other about 3 volts drop from the integrated circuits to make sure that we don't blow our LEDs out. So that's kind of what these are doing. And then finally, these 10K resistors, so 10K ohms, that's 10,000. These are also pull-down resistors. But these are to make sure that when our each of our data lines on the other side of the D-latch, when they aren't actively being used, when they aren't actively being pulled up to 5 volts, they are successfully pulled down to 0 volts. So this is make sure the switch is off if it's not actively being pressed. So we'll take each of those in order. Let's go ahead and start with the current limiting resistors. So these 33 ohm resistors right here. So these 33 ohm resistors are the first thing that gets applied immediately after data comes in. So each of these are our RJ45 plugs, which is what the data lines are coming in from. And you'll notice there are all of these 4 arrays right here. They kind of look like 2 single arrays. But if you look closely, you can actually see one of them has a square hole on it and the rest are circular. That one is indicating which one's pin 1. And so you can see there's a square hole there, a square hole there, square hole there, and square hole there. So these are actually 4 separate resistor buses. And that's what these are. And if you look closely on these integrated circuits, you can see that on the pattern of them, there's some writing, and there's actually this small black dot on one of the sides of the resistor buses. And that black dot is telling you that this is pin number 1. And so what we're going to do is make sure that when we're plugging these resistor arrays in, that we're lining up that black dot is the one that lines up with the square hole on the PCB. So for that one, it means we'll need to flip this around the other way and slide that one in there. Same with this resistor array. You're going to look and you see the black dot's on the left side of that resistor, so we'll flip it around and stick it in. Same with the rest of these. Now, conveniently, I did design this thing so that they all should be facing the same way, so maybe an easier way of remembering it is no text on this side, but the text should be on that side. So the text should be facing the front of the PCB. Now, same as before, we'll flip we'll flip the PCB around. Oh, and be careful not to drop out one of your resistors. This part's a little fiddly. Keep that in. You kind of need to hold them with your fingers to flip the thing over. And then once it's flipped over, you can kind of basically apply sideways pressure to each of the pins to get your fingers off of it and kind of hold it in place when then you brace it against the ground. Looks like I almost got it. Just missing one of the little resistor arrays here. Kind of try that again. Again, it's a little fiddly getting all of these in there. All right. Once you have them in place, then they should stay. And then actually when you're soldering this, typically what I'll do is I will just solder one of the pins, and just so that the thing gets held in place. And then I'll go back and heat up the solder so that it's the resistor array can move a little bit. And then I'll position the array so that it's actually vertical and it's not kinked off to the side. And then once that's done, I'll go back and solder everything else. So with that, we'll go ahead and apply a little bit of solder to pin 1 on each of these arrays here. And it's exactly the same idea as the resistors, or as the capacitors that we did before. You get your soldering iron a little bit hot, the pin, and then just add some solder to bead things up a little bit. And typically these through-hole resistor arrays are a little easier to get the solder to actually flow through than the capacitors. Not totally sure why that is, but now that all of them have a little bit of solder on them, you can flip them over, and now these shouldn't fall out quite so easily. But if you look carefully, you can see they're not super well lined up. So what I'll do is I'll stand the board up, and then I'll apply pressure with my finger on the back side, and then heat that solder up a little bit, and then try to position it so the thing sits flat. And just like that. So that's about good there. Move on to and you can see that that's now sitting more or less perpendicular. The other thing is that by applying this pressure with your back finger on the back side, I'm just basically pushing on it like that, that this also makes sure that the whole array is actually properly seated in these through holes, so that when you solder the other pins, they're actually all sticking through the hole. So again, I'll just apply a little bit of pressure with my finger, heat this up until it moves, I'll line the thing up, and then let the solder re-solidify. Same thing with the last pin here. Alright. So with that, hopefully you can see there's a nice little bead of solder on all of those, and if you flip it over, it probably won't show up super well on the camera, but if you look carefully you can see little beads of solder sticking out on that side as well. And more importantly for the aesthetics, all of those resistor arrays are more or less in line with each other. Alright, so with that, I'll go ahead and just add little beads of solder to all of the rest of the pins now that they're held in place, and we'll check back in.